Nice connection.
Well, I want to welcome everybody to the meeting tonight. It's a beautiful evening outside, but we've got a major topic to talk about, and we've got an absolute expert to talk about it. And just a couple quick things from MRES's side. As most people know, we're very actively involved right now in the eco experience, and so we're still looking for people to help out there. So feel free to get to the MRES's website, which is MnRenewables with an S.org, and sign up to be a volunteer. We had the training last night, but we're getting a video put together that was recorded last night so that people can do that and still participate. So,
and where will it be posted then?
It'll be on our website. Okay. under where you sign up. And then the other thing that we were just kind of talking about, a couple of us, is MRES is sponsoring a solar tour again this year, which is connected to ASIS, the American Solar Energy Society, and that'll be the first weekend in October. And it's going to be the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday this year. And we're expecting to get some really great sites. We've got a great team working on that together. And so it's going to be a great event. So, and again, most of that information is up there on MRES's website also. So to get us started, Curtis Zaun is a director of policy and regulatory affairs at the Minnesota Solar Energy Industry Association, commonly known as MnSEIA. And he's been practicing law in Minnesota for a number of years and is a registered lobbyist for MnSEIA and has been involved in some amazing work this year that happened at the Capitol that just really pushed solar to the top of the list in great accomplishment. So, Curtis, would you take it from here and tell us about all the good stuff that happened?
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. First, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening for the MRES speaker series. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. As Doug mentioned, I'm the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs. Before I joined the staff of MnSEIA, which I just joined in February, I was actually at the Department of Commerce, where I was Assistant General Counsel and the Assistant Commissioner of Energy for a while. And he did mention that I am an attorney and a lobbyist. Putting those two things together is not always the best. It's bad to be one of them. To be both of them is definitely a double whammy. So, and I'll be honest, I never in my life thought I'd be a lobbyist. So, anywho, as an initial matter, I just wanted to clarify. I know I saw the discussion. Doug and I had a little talks back and forth about what I would be talking about. I just want to clarify. Tonight, I'm mostly going to be talking. Well, I'll talk about MnSEIA, and then kind of the historic legislative session we had this year for solar and storage, and then kind of talking about a regulatory update and talking about a few things that are going on. I'm not an expert in kind of the federal stuff, IRA, things of that sort. That's all Pete Wyckoff. I heard he did a presentation for you guys, and he is awesome. I'm actually looking forward to watching his video. So he'll definitely give you an update. And I was at MRES's training last night. Again, there's tons and tons of information about all that stuff. My presentation is actually kind of a much higher level. When we talk about kind of money, it's going to be at like the state level and for programs and whatnot. Obviously, that's going to trickle down to some folks, especially like the battery storage grant program. But really, I'm talking about it at a pretty high level. So first about MnSEIA. MnSEIA is a 501c6 nonprofit trade organization, and that promotes and protects Minnesota's solar and storage industry on behalf of, it says over 150 member companies, but actually it's really member organizations, because we do have companies like actually Xcel Energy. We have Xcel Energy and Connexus. So the largest co-op in the state are our members, all the way down to rooftop installers. So, and also nonprofits. So Vote Solar, Solar United Neighbors, Cooperative Energy Futures, CCSA, which is the Coalition for Community Solar Access. So we have a lot of nonprofit members as well. So it really should say over 150 members, because they're not all companies. And we advocate the state legislature and regulatory arenas for a unified and actionable way to kind of move solar and storage forward. And with all of our members, you can imagine, everything from utilities down to rooftop installers, it's not often a unified message sometimes. It says, we were kind of focused on that, but it can be tough when you have a bunch of different people who all have different ideas about the best way to go solar. I mean, going solar that is the best. That's not debatable, but how you do that can vary greatly. Of course, you can find out more about MnSEIA at our website. Here's a list of our employees. So we are an organization of only 5 people. I think we get quite a lot done with the 5 folks that we have. Here's our board of directors. And so again, a wide range of folks who are doing a variety of things. And we really kind of value having a diversity of people and backgrounds to kind of help guide the organization to make sure we're moving Minnesota forward. A little bit, and I should also, as we start here, I was planning on keeping maybe like 5 or 10 minutes at the end for any kind of questions, but please feel free to interrupt me while I'm talking to ask me questions, because if I talk about distributed generation or a tariff or things of that sort, and it's not a term that you're familiar with, I'm happy to stop and explain it because I don't want to keep going with something that you're kind of missing out on. So I'm more than happy to talk about some of those concepts or anything else that pops up while we're talking about it. So MnSEIA was formed in 2009. Again, I'm not going to go through all the details here because I can share these slides with everybody after the fact. So, but formed in 2009 when there was only 330 solar installations producing, 1.5 megawatts of electricity. It's, not that long ago, we had a pretty small storage installation or solar installation setup. So 2013, we began organized efforts to culminate in important solar legislation. So we had the 1.5 solar energy standard by 2020. And this is when the CSG program was started. So the Community Solar Garden program, really groundbreaking at the time, very, very different because it included what's called the value of solar. And so as we note here, it's kind of a first of its kind tool. And the whole point of the value of solar was to determine, what that energy is worth being produced at the distributed level as opposed to the transmission level. And so, because there's lots of, variables that go in there. And at that point in time, too, also considering the value of solar considers like kind of offsetting natural gas, which is what you thought you'd be offsetting with CSGs. And so obviously there's environmental impacts when you're using, fossil fuel as opposed to solar. And so Commerce is the methodology for the value of solar, which was approved by the Public Utilities Commission. And after a couple of years, started being implemented for CSGs. So, and just so people know, CSGs are where you buy a subscription. So if you're someone who doesn't have access to solar resources, I know last night at our training, we talked about kind of the solar radar, which shows you whether your house has enough solar capacity or not. And I know it's not entirely accurate, but if you go through that and you find out you don't have enough solar capacity at your house to make, installing your own solar panels worthwhile, community solar gardens is where you can buy a certain percentage of the gardens and then get a bill credit. So it's a way for people to participate in solar who don't otherwise have access to solar resources, or sometimes maybe not enough solar resources. Maybe you have some access to solar, but you have a greater load than can be compensated with what you can put on your own roof. 2016, kind of moving along, Minnesota becomes a $1 billion plus market. So really growing the industry in Minnesota from, about 150 million to 1 billion and over 300 megawatts of solar. So not very much later, you already had 300 megawatts. 2017, it continues to grow. You get 500 megawatts. Job growth in the solar industry is up 48%. Clean energy jobs are growing 4 times faster. And by 2017, MnSEIA had 100 members. Nice milestone. 2018, that's when renewables start becoming the cheapest option. I think at that point in time, it was mostly wind. But again, renewables are starting to kind of have a bigger place in the energy landscape. MnSEIA pushed to have the PUC reevaluate the distributed generation tariff. And this was important back then because how people were building solar is, and just maybe give a brief background, if you guys all know this, I apologize. But when it comes to solar, you have solar on your rooftop, right? So that's a lot of home systems, maybe small businesses. Up from there, you started having these CSGs, which were typically, they're limited to 1 megawatt, but they're sort of much bigger. You benefit from the economies of scale. And then up to utility scale. I mean, there's a mid-size, and our tariff allows for projects up to 10 megawatts, but nothing was getting built at that level. And so you have this tariff, and the tariff is kind of the rules by which you kind of connect your project and the rate that you're getting paid for. Because obviously a business wants to know, like, what are you going to pay me to produce electricity? And nobody was using this distributed generation tariff. So MnSEIA pushed to kind of like start making that tariff more transparent, like tell people, businesses, what they're going to get paid for that electricity, so we can move this forward. Because if we want to move Minnesota forward as a whole and really get all the installed solar as much as possible, rooftop systems are great, but typically they're 7 to 12 or so kilowatts, and so it takes a lot of individual systems to kind of really get up to those megawatts. Whereas if you get 1 megawatt CSGs or 10 megawatt systems, then it really adds up much faster. And so we pushed for that. Why that's relevant is the hearing on that was just recently, and I will tell you, when we went to the hearing started off with, even though this tariff has never been used and no projects have ever been developed on it, which would build more solar in this state, Commissioner Means started out by saying, I don't see a problem here, and that's part of some of the headwinds I think that we've had in Minnesota for kind of continuing to push solar forward and develop more of it, is that there's some folks that will see that not as a problem, a tariff that's never ever been used, no projects that have been developed there. And I responded from MnSEIA saying, this is one of many tools in the toolbox. You have rooftop, CSGs, we have some new programs, solar on schools, other things I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But this is another element that you want there so that people can build solar and have more solar resources in this state for all the reasons we talked about. It creates more jobs, it's cleaner, all of those reasons. And unfortunately, the PUC decided not to really do anything about that tariff. So it still sits there, and nothing's being done with it. We have some new programs that hopefully will make up for that void, but you really missed out on an opportunity to add another tool to the toolbox. David Schaefer actually joined. So some of you who've worked in solar probably know David. He joined in 2018. 2019, we reach 1 gigawatt of solar. So, obviously some huge strides in very few years. And candidly, a lot of that was the community solar garden program, because it allowed people to subscribe, and they built, hundreds and hundreds of megawatts in a really short period of time. And that's the really value and benefit of community solar gardens, is that you can get a lot built in a much quicker time than even utility scale. Utility scale projects are much bigger, 2, 3, 4, 500 megawatts. But that kind of project takes years and years to develop and build, and thousands of acres of land. And so these smaller scale, bigger than rooftops, smaller than utility scale, that's a spot where you can build a lot of solar, benefit from the economies of scale, but also get it done traditionally much quicker, as long as you're not having too many interconnection issues. So 1 gigawatt of solar, Xcel announces they want to have 3 gigawatts of solar by 2030. MnSEIA also talks about, we're always advocating for solar rewards. Solar rewards is a way to incentivize rooftop systems. So smaller systems sized 120% to load, and you get a production incentive. So instead of just a big rebate like you're doing with the IRA, or that's a tax incentive, or just kind of other kinds of direct money, this is a solar production incentive. So for every kilowatt of energy you produce, you get a credit for that. So, and it's varied over the last few years. I think most recently it's at 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And then 2019, MnSEIA becomes an official affiliate of the National SEIA, so national organization. 2020 continued to grow, obviously even during the pandemic. This is one of the few industries that kept growing during COVID, so that was great. MnSEIA gets more money for solar rewards. Again, that's wonderful. And talk about some projects. We had more full-time staff in actual office. So as the industry has grown, MnSEIA has grown as well to kind of continue to promote and defend the industry. 2021, again, more good stuff happening, getting more money for solar rewards. We get solar on schools, which is great, another way to get schools involved, and obviously the solar industry as well. And then this is when we expand our mission to focus on energy storage, because one of the issues always with solar is, when it comes to large scale stuff, is it's intermittent, just like wind is. And so that battery storage is a really important component as we move forward for the industry as a whole to add resiliency. So that's why everything you'll see now these days is solar plus storage. So, and then we get a new director. Logan O'Grady is our current executive director. He started in 2021. 2022, again, we have a lot more. We start working with the AG's office, and we grow to over 140 members, and we host our largest Gateway conference at the time, which was 500 attendees and 218 companies, which is fantastic. And this year, so we all know about the 100% carbon free by 2040 standard. We also, we lead some efforts to pass a distributed generation standard. And so this is that tariff I was talking about that was being completely unutilized. Didn't know where that was going to go. And so during the session, we kind of really opened up that mid-scale market, something, above CSGs, but below utility scale that can get built faster. So there's a whole new standard. I'll talk a little bit about at the end, another big success, and it's going to get a lot of solar built in the state. We also, I would say we just changed the CSG program, changed the rate structure so that we kind of prioritize low to moderate income people and public interest customers over a lot of commercial customers. I think the original program has a ton of commercial customers because they instantly saw the value in subscribing to a CSG. And so a lot of the projects, the majority of the projects, I think some like 80% of them were largely had commercial or, public institution, cities, churches, all those kinds of larger institutions join them right away. And I think there's 25,000 residential customers making up the remainder of the percent. So there's more of them, but a smaller percentage. And then obviously what I'm talking about a little bit is, the historic $80 million in programmatic funding being directly invested into the solar and storage industries. So talk about money. So here's a kind of a high-level overview. So almost 30 million in solar for schools. And again, this is to help schools install solar on their facilities. Solar on public buildings is a new idea of kind of helping public buildings do it. Obviously, resiliency grants for the grid. That's always important because as you're adding more generation, distributed generation throughout the grid as opposed to the traditional like big power plants, lines coming in, resiliency becomes an issue. And so you want to deal with that. And also trying to add things causes upgrades. And so we've had some real bottlenecks because, we've heard about rooftop solar projects where they've been telling that it's going to take, it's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars to upgrade, their local system to install their rooftop solar project of, 5 to 9 kW. And so the legislature allocated some money to actually kind of pay for some of those upgrades so you can get connected without it being, huge upfront costs. More money for solar rewards again, because that's a really successful program, a great way to get more rooftop solar installed. And then energy storage incentives. So there's $7 million that is going to go towards, installing batteries on your home. And I think this is another great resiliency thing. I know we've had some storms recently. My wife and I have had some power outages. We keep saying, God, we need to get some, we get solar panels and some battery storage. And that's $4 million for the Excel service territory and $3 million for outside of Excel's territory. Just to give you a little highlight of that, you are getting up to 5. Well, in the Excel territory, there's very specific program requirements, which I assume will be mirrored in the outside Excel territory, but not necessarily. But grants are up to $5,000, and this is just a check that you'll get for up to 50 kilowatt hour systems. So basically, you're getting about $100 per kilowatt hour. Just you install it, has to be installed with solar, so you can't just put a battery at your house just to kind of have almost like a generator backup, just to have the energy. It has to be connected to solar, which is great. So it allows people to kind of have a more resilient system themselves. Policy provision wise, we talked about the new community solar garden program as expanding it. And one of the issues with the old program was that it was uncapped. So you never knew how much was going to get built. The first couple of years, it was several hundred megawatts came online right away. And so, that's a problem from a utility scale. As you're trying to plan for what's going to come on, that's kind of problematic. And so some of the changes they made were with the new program, it's capped at 100 megawatts for the first couple of years. They also changed the incentive structure in such a way as to incentivize low to moderate income people. There's actually even a requirement that 30% have to be low to moderate income. And low to moderate income is defined as, what is it, like 150% of the area median income. So it's not people who are in poverty, but it's, people who are moderately income, middle income people as well, middle class folks. And then up to 55% of every garden has to be, public interest, which can include those low to moderate income people. So the new program, the old one was just kind of like, here's one rate for everybody. You have to have at least 5 people, but other than that, there wasn't many requirements. And so as we moved forward and matured and built lots of CSGs, the legislature really wanted to focus on certain groups of folks to make sure they were having access to solar as well. So creating a rate structure and certain requirements. And of course, putting a cap helps Excel really plan for that. So they know, okay, we're going to no more than 100 megawatts per year, and then it ramps down over the next few years. And I think after a few years, it's down to 60 megawatts a year. distributed generation standard. And so I mentioned before, this talking about distributed generation, this is requiring that, utilities have one, and it's not including co-ops, but just the public utilities get 1 to 3%, depending on the utility, of their energy from distributed generation by 2030, which we all estimate is going to be about 800 megawatts of new solar being added to the grid in the next 7 years. This program still has to be proposed. It's going to be through a competitive bidding process. It's different than the CSG program. The CSG program, is a subscription based. So you get on, you get solar. You also don't have those big upfront costs traditionally. You're just kind of paying a monthly subscription. This is just basically companies building solar that's getting attached to the grid at the distributed level as opposed to the transmission level, and then selling it at a competitive price. So it opens up a lot more jobs, and again, grows solar in the state. And then we also had a customer bill of rights, which placed restrictions on homeowners associations, because there's a lot of people who live in home and with homeowner associations that weren't being allowed to install solar because of the restrictions they had. And so this became a big issue. And if I recall, we had really bipartisan support on this issue to kind of allow more people to go solar. So this is what I was talking about, the rubber meeting the road. So you have, obviously, you pass these policies at the legislature, programs designed to kind of hit certain folks, meet certain goals. We have money, the IRA, obviously rebates, funding mechanisms. You have all of that stuff, but none of that is going to get done unless you can figure out where you're going to connect it and also be able to connect it. And so in the last couple of years, there's really been some issues with connecting. The last MnSEIA kind of update that I saw showed, we're like 16th in the country for installed solar capacity, mostly from 17 and 18, where there was, like 800 megawatts in those 2 years. But every year since then, we've been going down dramatically, such that I think last year there was maybe 30 megawatts of community solar gardens installed. And so, you really got to keep moving along if we want to move forward. And MnSEIA's estimates, for the next 5 years are that Minnesota's 32nd in the nation for what they propose that we're going to be able to install in the next 5 years. So we started really, really strong. Our CSG program was the largest, most successful one in the country. It's now dropped down to third. We put a lot of solar in there, obviously got us to 16th. And since then, it's been going downhill since then. And we've been working really, really hard to kind of build it up. And so with this last session, we're hoping that, we've turned the corner, can kind of go forward. But in order to do that, there's still some things that have to be worked on. And so I tried to kind of grab a couple of high level types of things that affected a bunch of different people. One is what they call the hosting capacity analysis. So when you're trying to build larger projects on a grid, you got to figure out where they're going to go, where there's capacity to put them in with the equipment, what it's going to cost you, that kind of stuff. Having good information is very efficient, because if you don't have good information, companies will tend to throw a bunch of applications in a bunch of different spots that kind of can clog things up, even though those projects aren't really viable. And so having really good information, in the hopes they'll build something. So they might put something in and then find there's not sufficient capacity after they do what's called a system impact study, which looks at what it'll take to interconnect that system. So having really good information is incredibly important. And so for years, MnSEIA and others have really been trying to, get more and more accurate information. What we found is with Xcel, they have incredibly bad information about their system. I think when you own it all, maybe you don't care that much, don't need to have it that accurate. You just maybe goes into a box like so much of my junk mail just sits in a big box somewhere. And there's probably some really important papers in there, but I don't know what's in there anymore. When you start wanting to have other people connect to that system, you need to know what you have where, what equipment's where, the conductor, all of those things. And what we have been finding is that Xcel has really bad records. And even the paper records haven't been kind of brought up into the digital age. At the last hearing on this issue, Commissioner Sugar was, looked at Xcel and said, hey, he's an engineer. When you build something, you have to write down what you're building and where you put it. Because Xcel has been effectively telling people like they have no idea what they have in the system anywhere. And I've found that when I've had some clients and they're trying to build something and, getting just wildly inaccurate information about the size of conductor, where it's at, transformers, things of that sort. So this is really, really important. Accurate information is really important for kind of moving the solar industry forward. And that has a trickle down effect. So when you're trying to build large projects, that starts to impact, your rooftop system. You're like, I'm building, I'm only putting something on my roof. It's, 5 to 7 kW. That's not big. That can't impact anything. The way the process works is kind of goes in order. So if you have a lot of big people putting in projects, it might use up all that capacity such that your small system can't get built. And we've been hearing a lot about that. In fact, there's something I'll talk about in a little bit to address that. And so this can have a cascading effect. So it's really important to get good information so businesses are building where they need to, so it doesn't affect other folks in a way that it shouldn't. Another issue that's come up is, and this is the next one, it's called ARR compliance filing. Community solar gardens got a certain rate at first. We talked about the value of solar, but before they got that, they got what's called the applicable retail rate, which was the full amount of cost of your energy bill. So your energy charges and all those other charges. If you look at your bill, it was basically that full amount, and they got that for the first couple of years. It's been a point of controversy, and so it was recently changed. But when Xcel filed something, they actually eliminated the definition that was in the contracts that everybody had signed years ago. And so this has been hugely important to MnSEIA, because the notion that you could try to retroactively change a contract, we think will have a chilling effect on businesses in Minnesota. I mean, if you're a business and you're looking to do business here, solar business, and you can see that they want to change the contracts, 7, 8, 9, 10 years down the road, that is going to really worry you. Businesses need certainty. And so we've been participating in that docket saying, you can't change this contract language, and we'll see where that goes. Third thing on this thing is called the technical planning limit. MnSEIA has been dealing with this issue for a couple of years, and what we want to do is essentially you have the system. Xcel has capped their system at 80% of its capacity, so it's limiting everyone's ability to connect projects. Generally when you try to connect your system, they do a study or they can kind of run through screens to see what energy you're putting into the system and what impact that it will have to make sure the system continues to run safe and reliably. That's what everybody wants, obviously. Otherwise, you have a situation like you had down in Texas. And so there's a process for going through that. And Xcel decided, because there was a lot of these CSGs on a select few of feeders, that just across their entire system, they were going to basically take 20% of it essentially off the market, which by IREX estimates is like 2 to 3 gigawatts of power. That is a lot of capacity to install new solar. And so they just unilaterally put it in place. They kind of met with what's called the distributed generation work group to say, talk about this. And they were saying, oh, we're having problems doing our studies. Can we limit it? And everyone said no. And then Xcel eventually just said, we're just going to do it unilaterally. They went to the they went to the PUC first, said, we want to do this. Can you give us approval? Which is what they should do, because changing a requirement for connecting, to the grid, changing the standards, changing the rules. These are all, Xcel, like all the utilities, these monopolies are all regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. And the Public Utilities Commission, for those of you who aren't super familiar with that, is like, it's how you regulate these monopolies, because they all have a certain service territory. So there's no competition. And so because you lack competition, someone's supposed to oversee to make sure they're playing fair, essentially. And so they went to the PUC to talk about how they were fairly allowing people to interconnect to the distribution system. And the PUC didn't approve it, but also just didn't take action. They didn't have enough information. And so Xcel just unilaterally limited their entire system, which increases costs for everybody, increases time. It's extremely problematic. It's been sitting there. And so ever since I started, one of my goals is to file a complaint at the Public Utilities Commission to bring this issue back before them, to address it, to really open up the system so that, more rooftop and all these programs that we have coming up that we've talked about, we have all this money and all these great programs, but all of that will be for naught. We won't get to use all the IRA money we could otherwise use that Pete's probably talked about. We won't get to interconnect all these projects. We won't be able to make a cleaner Minnesota with lots of great clean energy jobs if you can't connect the projects. And so we'll be bringing that in front of the Public Utilities Commission this fall, and hopefully they will realize that is a problem, and it's a problem if Minnesota wants to meet its clean energy goals and move towards a clean energy economy. Another issue that we've come across is co-ops. And so in our state, you have a bunch of different types of utilities. You have investor-owned utilities like Xcel. owned by private people. Then you have co-ops and municipal utilities. And so obviously they have members. And so they don't have the same profit motive that Excel does because they're not investors, they have members. Co-ops were allowed to kind of monitor themselves in 2017 because they are democratically elected, don't have the same profit motive that public utilities have. They thought, oh, well, if you don't have that profit motive that a public utility has, then you probably won't do anything bad. So we'll let you self-regulate, let you enforce the laws against yourself. And that started in 2017. One thing MnSEIA has been finding as we've had members try to go out and build projects, out of the regulated areas, so out of where Excel is or in the public utilities and co-op territory. Some of them have changed the rules about how much you can connect, because there's certain rules about how big a size of program or a project you can have and what rate you get. People often hear about the net metering rate. And so if you have a system less than 40 kW, essentially, when you obviously aren't generating electricity, you have to use electricity. So when you have excess electricity, you sell it to the utility at what they call the net metering rate, which is basically the rate they charge you. And then when you need it back at night, when your solar panels aren't working, you get it back at the same cost. So essentially, they're kind of acting like a big battery for you. And so you're buying from them at the same price you're selling to them. So it's a wash. And then at the end of the year, if you have any excess credits, they got to pay you for that. Well, as you can imagine, co-ops would prefer to buy at what they call the avoided cost rate, which is generally about 3 cents or so, 3-4 cents a kilowatt hour, and then sell it back to you. So they're almost selling your electricity and making a profit on you of 3 to 4 times. So that's become a problem. We found that, in this whole self-regulating part, some of them are literally changing the rules for what the capacity of the system is, which affects both where you can put a meter or where they require a meter. Generally, you only need to have a meter at what they call the point of interconnection or point of common coupling, which is where your meter is, right? And when you get solar panels, it's bidirectional, so it goes both ways. Well, some co-ops, when they want to measure it basically at your panels, they want to require another meter. So that's additional cost, putting it somewhere it's really not needed, and limiting your system. And so that's an issue that I dealt with directly in private practice, and I've recently heard from another member, and we've been hearing kind of rumblings about varieties of that. So it's another area where MnSEIA wants to focus on working with, the trade group for co-ops and start working with them. Obviously, we have co-op members to kind of work out that issue, because interconnecting your solar project should be the same across the entire state of Minnesota, to the extent that there's not, minor little nuances about their system that need to reflect the unique characters of their system. But generally speaking, if you want to put solar on your roof, you should be able to do it, and you should be treated the same way. Minnesota law says you should be treated the same way, whether you're up in, Duluth or Bemidji, or you're down here in the cities. I mean, if you are putting on a system less than 40 kW, you should be able to get the average retail rate. And how that capacity is measured is different too, because if you're limiting the export of your system, let's say you have a 50 kW system, but you limit the export to 40 because that's what you need 50 to kind of compensate for your load. The law allows you to do that, and co-ops are not allowing you to do that. So it's another one of the issues that we kind of will have to deal with, and I think in the near future. So with this new community solar program, this is like some dockets coming up, and I don't know if I should backdrop a little bit on again, the PUC regulates them, and how they generally work is something comes up, like a new program is instituted, or a complaint is filed, like how about the complaint we're talking about, or Excel does a compliance filing. They file something complying with some order or some reporting requirement. From that, the PUC can start what's called a notice, which basically allows the public, and when I say public, I mean anybody. You don't have to be an attorney. They have a very open public process, and they're very happy to help you with that. Can file comments. So, when Excel puts in some new program, anyone can file a comment saying, I think that's a good idea, or I think that's a bad idea, and express why. And so obviously you have a lot of associations like MnSEIA, Citizens Utility Board, which really looks out for kind of ratepayers, Cooperative Futures, Vote Solar, Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Solar United Neighbors will often watch these things to see what's happening, to make sure they're doing things that are consistent with the law, consistent with public interest, and consistent with obviously promoting the solar industry moving forward. So this is a docket. So when they passed the law, one of the things they talked about was transitioning the old CSG program to the new one, because as I mentioned, there was differences between the two. So they opened up a docket to talk about how that transition is going to happen. And Excel is filing their comments first by the 28th. And then what they have our initial comments. So that's kind of anybody can start saying what they think about Excel's proposal. And then there's always reply comments. Generally, how these things work is they have initial comments, then you get a few weeks typically, and then you file reply comments. And then once all the comments are in from all the parties, usually a few weeks later, the staff will look at things, set it up for hearing. They'll summarize in what are called briefing papers, and there's a hearing. And how the PUC works is it's not like a judge where you're doing everything behind the scenes and you have like a court date. The PUC is literally with the 5 commissioners debating everything there open and public. And so they're talking about the issues, they'll ask people questions, and then they vote on what they're going to do. The briefing papers will have typically a bunch of different decision options that come out of all the briefings that happen about, you know, what they think the commissioners could do. And they vote on them and say, okay, we're going to do this or that. And then typically after that, you know, a few weeks, maybe 6 weeks later, you'll get an order that actually says the PUC ordered these things. But the day you're at the hearing, you will typically see them making a decision. Sometimes that decision is, we're not going to decide anything today. We're going to kick the can down the road for a couple of years. You know, we'll set it. We'll ask for a compliance filing a year from now to say where things are at. So sometimes the decision is to not make a decision, but a decision is always made, you know, that day at the hearing. And you know, and their focus is on the public interest and kind of balancing, you know, developing more distributed generation, rooftop stuff, larger projects, utility things. They set all the rates for all the utilities. So Excel's rates are set by them, and you know, they watch over all those things. And new programs, you know, if Excel wants to expand and install a bunch of EV charging stations and charge the ratepayers, that is something that they have to approve. And so the Public Utilities Commission is an extremely important, not a lot of people know about it, but it's an extremely important institution in this state because they have a huge effect on, you know, the legislature passes all these policies, but whether they get implemented or not is largely dictated by how the PUC deals with those issues. And so hugely important. All their hearings are also public. You can go on their calendar, and when they're being webcast, you can literally watch them live, and then they're all recorded. So if there was ever any issue you were ever interested in, you can go and pull up the hearing and watch it. And all the things that are filed, that's also very public. You can just pull up anything that's publicly filed. Some things are non-public. If there's trade secret information, that will be redacted. But you know, whatever anybody files, anything that MnSEIA has ever filed, or if MRES ever wanted to file anything, that's a public record that anyone can read about. And of course, the PUC's orders do the same thing. Next item is Excel's proposal to transition ARR to CSGs, ARR CSGs to the value of solar. So as I mentioned, you had the old solar program. In the first couple of years, they got a certain rate. One of the things that the commission did when they decided to kind of change it a little bit, but not really big, they asked Excel to propose to change the bill credit that all of those old CSG subscribers. So if you're a CSG subscriber or know anybody who subscribed to a CSG back in 2015, 16, you're getting the applicable retail rate, which is much higher than the value of solar. And they did that for the first couple of years to make sure all the projects were financeable. They had to make sure a certain bill credit was provided, so there was enough money to kind of build the projects. And so the PUC has asked Excel to propose essentially changing contracts that were signed, you know, almost 10 years at this point in time. So that's problematic for, obviously, if you were a subscriber and you thought you were kind of locked in to like a certain rate for 25 years, that was part of the bargain that you had. If you're, you know, cities did that. Excel is, I think, September 27th. They had 90 days from when the order came out, which is June 27th, to file a proposal. And so if you know anybody's involved in those, this is where you might want to comment. MnSEIA, of course, going to be commenting and being opposed to this, because not only does it seem unfair to everybody who, you know, was promised a certain rate and now they're making a proposal to change it, but also, you know, we're concerned about the chilling effect that it'll have on just development and of solar as a whole in the entire state if you can just change contracts retroactively. So that seems to be a problem, not just for CSGs, but really for any type of development. If you set the precedent that, you know, years down the road, at the request of Excel or anybody else, you can just change a contract. So that's a really big issue for us that we're going to be dealing with this fall. And then another thing that came up, this is a docket that's going to get open because the legislature told them to open a docket on this issue. As I mentioned before, you had a lot of CSGs crowding out certain feeders. And the way the process works is kind of, you know, it's a it's like standing in line at a concert, right? One person's in, and so if you're like 20 back and there's only 15 tickets, then you might not get in, and that's caused a lot of problems for a lot of these rooftop solar projects, which are much smaller than a CSG or any larger DG project. And it's really become a problem because a lot of homeowners can't get solar. And so the legislature, recognizing this problem, has told the PUC to look at this issue and essentially fast track them, move these smaller customer sited projects ahead of the larger projects in the queue, because the current rules are, again, first in time, first in right. And so they want to look at that and move people along so that everyone who wants rooftop can take advantage of the IRA, obviously the state grants, all those things. There's a lot of money out there to be developing solar. And if you are way back in line, you might not get around to it. So that's a situation where you have the PUC the legislature tell the PUC to open up a docket and do something about it. So with that, I would say mark your calendars for our 10th annual Gateway to Solar. This is our big conference. We're changing the venue this year. It's going to be October 9th and 10th, and we're at the Intercontinental right by the Minneapolis St. Paul Airport. So it's a great new venue. Last year, like I said, we mentioned before, we had 500, over 500 attendees and 110 speakers. It talks about a variety of issues dealing with the solar industry and the storage industry. It's a great way to network, learn about what's going on, what's changing. Lots of legislators are there to talk about things, PUC commissioners. It's just a really great place to stay involved in the solar industry. So with that, I'm a little quicker than I expected. I was maybe shooting for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but with that, that's all I have. If anybody has any questions about any of the things I talked about regulatory process, legislative process, deadlines, anything else, I'm more than happy to talk about them. And if you're shy and don't like doing that online, I have my contact information here, so you can feel free to just call me or send me an email, and I'll be happy to respond.
Curtis, question.
Yeah.
Back to the 80 million for the various projects. Yeah. I mean, where do you see the most impact on that? I mean, I know it'll affect everything, but when you talk, I like the solar on schools. A lot of schools I know of are putting solar on. They're really excited about it. Is there any chance that those schools won't be able to, get it on the grid, kind of thing?
Yeah, no, that's why it's a big, and that's why it's a big issue. That's why that limitation is a big factor for us. Now, keep in mind too that you have solar in Excel's territory and solar outside of Excel's territory. So I have no doubt that anything outside of Excel's territory is going to get built. I mean, that shouldn't be a problem. The distributed generation penetration outside of Excel's territory is not nearly as great, and folks generally don't seem to be as antagonistic towards distributed generation as Excel has been. And so I think that's going to make a big impact. I think those projects are going to get built. In Excel's territory, limiting obviously the grid, restricting it by 20%, really puts a premium on where you're trying to connect. And so, but even if you're out in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing else out there, depending on what's around, I mean, taking 20%, off of the plate can really cause some problems. Or even if they let you connect, it might increase your interconnection costs. So how the rules work is when you want to connect your project, you put an application, say, I want to put my project here. And you're like, okay. They study it depending on how big it is. If it's really small, they can just do some what they call screens, like how big's the size, where you're at. It's all okay. When you're larger, you do what's called a system impact study, where they study okay, you're going to put this much power on this feeder. What equipment needs to be upgraded to be able to handle that generation with obviously a margin of. And so taking 20% off that might require you to upgrade something that you wouldn't otherwise need to upgrade, because what I've also found out is when they started the program, they took the equipment rating, so the amount of electricity that the system can handle, the equipment can handle itself, added on what's called the daytime minimum load. So that's the amount of energy that's getting pulled off of that equipment because it's being used by local people, local businesses and houses. And that was the kind of the capacity of that particular feeder. And so now they're dropping it back, which is even less than that, which doesn't even account for the fact that I've been told that, equipment itself has a safety margin. So when you say you need a 20% margin of safety for to have reliability, the equipment already accepts the fact that at times it might go above the equipment rating. So, oftentimes I've heard transformers, you can go up to 140% of the equipment rating, for a period of time, not forever. You can't run it that way nonstop. That'll cause failure at some point in time. But all the equipment can be above capacity for some period of time. And so this limitation is really putting a huge hindrance on that in the territory. That's why it's an issue that needs to be resolved, hopefully at the PUC. But our expectation is if the PUC doesn't resolve it, they've shown such an incentive to do something and move Minnesota's clean energy economy forward and have more distributed generation, renewable resources, that if it's something the PUC won't address, that hopefully they'll address it and get rid of it, because there's no precedent for it. They just we're not aware of any other state or any other utility is putting this kind of limitation on their system, which is completely hindering development.
Just a quick question on the
Yep.
Solar on Schools program. When
Yep.
that started out, the non-XL territory was limited to 40 kW, and XL's program was unlimited. Is that still the same way? Or
Well,
I mean, what I understand, it's now all one program. Is that right?
My understanding, and this is not something I've dug super in. That was not one of the areas I really dug into. It's all being administered by Commerce now, and that was one difference
Right.
before. Excel had their program, and Commerce was doing outside. It's all now under Commerce, but as far as the details, I'm not sure they all still have the same rules. I would think they'd be similar, but I'll have to dig into the legislation a little bit and see if anything changed there, and find that out. But no, I think solar on schools and solar in public buildings are great programs to help obviously incentivize, those institutions to kind of go green, because they're very public, right? I mean, you're bringing the kids to school, you're seeing the solar, you can learn about it. It's really a great way to kind of, I don't want to say indoctrinate, but like expose children to like seeing solar, working in action and seeing the benefits if you don't have it on your own home. So
Yeah.
it's just a really fantastic program.
What I love about it is that, when and in fact, I talked to Excel about this years ago, and they said, we support this, but if you're going to do it, we want to make sure there's curriculum in the school. So it's not just solar panels on the roof, but there's actually curriculum in the school. And a lot of the people I've talked with and worked with, there's a couple companies that have developed, like the Solar Suitcase program is one.
Yep.
And other ones that, actually have wonderful programs. So I don't want to take all the questions, but I got one more quick one. I want to jump in on the energy storage incentives.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, is it like companies to start storage businesses, or is it people to
No. It's grant money directly for you. So you installing up to 50 kilovolt hour systems on your premises. Like I said, the Excel one is up to a $5,000 grant. The non-Excel one doesn't have any explicit like limitations, but I would expect Commerce to come up with something similar so they're all the same. But literally, it's just a way to help lower the cost of installing a battery on your system. And you can't, it's not just a battery, it has to be connected to a solar system. So either you already have a solar system, you want to add a battery, or when you're installing your solar system, you're including a battery as well. So, and it's just limited. Like it's a one-time allocation. This is not recurring. So like we were talking about last night, once they're gone, they're gone. So if you want to get a battery, if you've been thinking about it for a while, once that program gets up and running, and some of the programs have deadlines, like there are certain times you had to, kind of put a program in to get approved. You get approval either from Commerce or get approval from the Public Utilities Commission, or get it up and running. The new CSG program is supposed to be up and running by January 1. Some did not have deadlines. This is one of those that did not have a deadline. So if you're interested, I would say reach out to Commerce, ask them. They'll probably say they're working on it. I know they're working on it. They have so many programs to stand up. But as you can imagine, they're prioritizing the ones that have deadlines. And because this one doesn't have a deadline, I don't envision that that it'll be kind of stood up all that soon. Though I want to say, I think Excel has to put in their proposal by maybe November 1st, but there's no approval of it. And so yeah, but it's a great, if anyone's been thinking about getting a battery, once those programs are up, that is the time to do it for sure.
Is this at all like the IRA side where, the batteries have to be made in America and all that kind of stuff?
No,
Okay.
not at all. No limitations on that. It's I can send the bill provisions to you, Doug, or anybody else who wants them. It's really small and straightforward. There's not a lot there. It's like I said, it's like, for the Excel one, it's like 50 kW. It's almost like put your name, what's your system size, here's your grant, here's a check, right? I mean, it's not super complicated. I mean, I'm assuming it'll be a one-page application once it gets up and running. But yeah, so it should be great. There's no limitations about where they're built or anything. It's just to get more storage out there.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions?
I have a question. This is Chris.
Hey, Chris.
It's about this too, and I don't know, I missed something. All this money, how much of it is coming from our state or from the federal? Is it part of the IRA being allotted to Minnesota and all the
No,
state?
This is all state money. So yeah, this isn't like kind
All
of
state money.
this is all state money. And so, this is on top of whatever federal money there is, but this isn't part of that. I know there were some matching grant programs. I know Commerce was involved with making sure there was matching money for in certain areas where they needed to do that to get federal money, but this is like pure state money.
And it's going through the same kind of regulatory process that the IRA program is going through, right?
Well, it's somewhat different. I mean, obviously, yeah, as a state program, I mean, it operates differently. So certain, the grant programs are being run by Commerce. I know someone mentioned, I heard last night, the e-bike rebate program, which I think is actually Revenue is running that program, if I thought. But so for this, it's not the same regulatory process because obviously the IRA is being dealt with at the federal level, and you have like the IRS putting out guidance for certain things because it works that way, right? It's a tax incentive. These, if it's a rebate program run by Commerce, for example, with the battery storage, they'll come up with a program, they'll come up with an application where you'll submit your application, obviously some level of verification about what it is, and then they cut you a check. I mean, they have a fund, that money, that $7 million, it's to run the program and to send out the incentives, the rebates. So all of it's not going towards rebates because obviously they need to hire somebody to do that job, but it is, that's the money being allocated. Commerce will set up a program. The parameters are really, they're pretty simple. There's no requirement, as Doug asked about, like, where the battery comes from. It's purely based on size with a cap of $5,000, which frankly also can be changed. Right in the statute, it says if they don't think that's sufficient, you can actually increase it if there's some evidence that that's not sufficient to kind of use up the money.
One more
Yeah.
related question to that.
Sure.
We've heard that the IRA, we had our last speaker, was his name Tim? But anyway, he was saying he was brought in to sort of work with Commerce in particular to work out the regulation for the IRA money. And so there, you can imagine there's a huge group of people, or whatever, an agency or whatever, trying to figure that out and scratching their head, waiting for federal guidance and so forth. Is there a different regulatory body working with this money that's just state? Or is it all the same?
No. Definitely, it's a different body. I mean, in the legislation, so when the legislature passes a bill, they usually will dictate, like who is supposed to work on something. So when it comes to like, the energy storage stuff, that's Commerce. With the new CSG program, for example, they pass the parameters of that, how that's going to work out. And I know they will work with industry. So as they're starting to get that up and running, they will bring stakeholders in to say, hey, how's this going to work? How do we transition from the old one to the new one? There are some, when you pass a law, I would say you're kind of putting, a basic skeletal structure, and it's the agencies that then really put all the meat on those bones. And so the questions that Commerce is going to have to ask and answer, I should not ask, but have an answer about how they're going to deal with some of the issues for that new program. What certain things meant that are in the, in the statement. One of the issues that's up for comment is, average retail rate was used in the statute. And I know we were involved in those sessions, and it was meant to be the net metering rate, but for some reason the revisor seemed to skip out on those two words. So now that's kind of open for debate. It's really out for debate. I think it'll be resolved. But so you have to look at some terms and kind of deal with that kind of stuff. So I think you're going to have a lot of participation by the industry with like the new CSG program because of the complexity of it. With this battery rebate program, like I wouldn't expect them reaching out to the industry all that much. They might say, hey, Excel's program has these limited parameters. Our outside Excel one doesn't have those same ones, but should we do it the same? I mean, I would think they might want to, and they might ask some folks. They're not required to, though, at all. They're just going to
Okay.
run the program. So it really depends on the type of program that you're talking about. I know with the distributed energy system upgrades, they have to put a plan into Commerce to approve. So like they're supposed to Excel has to come up with a proposal and then give it to Commerce, and Commerce is specifically directed to approve it. Sometimes it's the PUC that has to approve certain things, the Public Utilities Commission. So those are two different agencies, and sometimes stuff that gets approved by Commerce would probably go in front of the PUC to approve as well, or at least get it into the tariff to some extent. So it really depends on the legislation. There's not a one size fits all.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else? Like I said, if anybody else has any questions, feel free, just to email me. I'm more than happy to, answer any questions offline. And we only have 2 minutes here. So
Curtis, I
Yeah.
got another question.
Sure.
You've been working at the Capitol for years. And
no, just this year for the most part, I'll be honest with you. I mean,
Well,
I got there a
yeah.
little bit when I was at Commerce, but really this was my first year.
yeah, well, here's my question, and kind of an oddball question is, I helped stand up MnSEIA, and I'm so proud of what they've been doing and everything.
Yeah.
But then I go to another organization like Fresh Energy and CEE, and I mean, everybody takes credit for doing all these different programs. And just, do you have any sense? I mean, when you guys are there working on this stuff, I mean, is there typically 10 other organizations there, working with you, or is it more than that, or how does that work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'll be honest, and it was new to me. And like I said, when I was at Commerce, I got up there once in a while, but not a lot. Again, I kind of work on more of the regulatory stuff, but it depends, I think, on what you're talking about. And so, for example, with the new CSG program, yeah, there was many people in the room. Fresh Energy was there, CCSA was there, Cooperative Energy Futures was there, Commerce was there, talking about like how this should look. What should the cap on the program be? What should the rate structure be? What other requirements should there be? So you had many people in that room. So I don't think any one person can take credit for. Frankly, I mean, I think the legislature should get all the credit because they're without them, nothing gets done. They're basically everyone else is just giving them advice. But like with the HOA stuff, I think that's something that that's Logan I think worked on other stuff more, but I think that's something like maybe we championed and like really pushed out there. So you might have a certain issue where maybe it's just one organization just pushing to get it through and trying to avoid any other conflict. Sometimes you will elicit other folks if you're worried about kind of any kind of controversy. So I think it really depends on the type of issue that you're talking about, whether or not how many people are involved in it and what kind of effort it takes.
Yeah, one of the things I was happy to see that you guys were able to get through is that discontinuing this area of like community solar gardens. In other words, you couldn't go from one county to the next and all that kind of thing. It's so nice that that's gone away now.
That's gone away. Yeah, that's something we've been trying to for years and years. And MnSEIA has always been fighting for that. And I guess that's the one. Some years is more effective than others. I mean, the last couple of years, depending on the composition of the legislature, it can be tough to get some things through. So, they stick with it from year to year. I mean, that's something that Logan's been working on ever since he got to MnSEIA, and I'm sure David Schaefer worked on it before. CSGs have been, for some reason, they've just been a point of controversy. I think largely because Excel has really vilified the programming. CSGs are meant to kind of, give access to everybody who doesn't otherwise have it, and to kind of remove a lot of the barriers that you have, like the big upfront costs that are there for a lot of folks, and they're very successful in other states. And Minnesota's was really, really successful and supported by a lot of people. But over the years, Excel has just been really against it, and constantly has been frankly bad mouthing it, which has made it tough to change it and do anything with it and to kind of get rid of that contiguous county. So with the change in the composition this last time around, it was we were able to kind of get in there and make some tweaks, because like any program, you start off with the best of intentions, and sometimes things don't always play out the way you wanted. I don't know that it was not intended for a lot of businesses to be involved, because it makes a lot of sense for them to kind of get involved, especially if you don't have access to solar resources, your roof's not big enough, whatever. But some folks want it to be more for individuals, so you got to get in and tweak the program to change it to accommodate that. So anyway,
one other bigger question is the 2040 policy. I hear from different utilities that I talk to that there's no way this is going to work. I mean, are you getting that sense at all when you
No,
guys
I
are?
mean, you heard that from the last goals too, right? And then they blew by them. So, um, I think utilities don't want to change. I mean, it's just kind of I mean, I think if you look across our country as a whole, there's a paradigm shift, right? 100 years ago, energy was generated by a dam, by a coal plant and sent out to everybody, and most were vertically integrated, right? And so you had one entity sending this off. And now essentially you have the ability of anybody to generate their own electricity. Is a huge shift as a whole. Some utilities are embracing that and recognizing the benefits of having distributed generation, like having a lot or most of their customers generate their own electricity and only going to them when they need extra, right? Other ones are just stuck in their old ways. Like some people don't like change and they're holding on. And I think that's what you're seeing across the country. And so it's whether you embrace change and you move forward. Some of them are doing that. I know Connexus, one of our members, is very much, working to embrace distributed generation and see how it works using new technologies, advanced inverters, smart meters, all of those things. And in my experience, Excel has just completely fought against, kind of all of that stuff. They don't want to provide a lot of information. They don't want to provide any information they say is a grid security issue, which most of it is not. Interconnection has been a huge problem. Everyone has heard about this. Anyone who's dealt with interconnections have seen what a huge problem this has become, just because how they deal with it. They've been very difficult to deal with and you get it, right? I mean, they're an investor-owned utility. Their fiduciary obligation is to make money for their investors, and they've been doing it for decades. They don't want to change that. They don't want competition, and literally every person in the state of Minnesota is a competitor, right? When you can generate your own electricity, you kind of become a competitor. And so I think some are just embracing change, and others are going to fight to stay in the old ways as long as they can. And I think that's not beneficial for the state of Minnesota, for the people of Minnesota, for our economy, or for our climate.
Excel seems to be very supportive of the electric vehicle program, though.
Well, if only they could run it well. I mean, I think that they haven't demonstrated they've been doing it very well. But yeah, I mean, again, keep in mind, Excel makes money by building things. They don't even make money by selling electricity anymore. They've been
Right.
decoupled. So they make money by building things. So they want to build stuff. I mean, I've heard, they repower wind projects that they're still fine, because maintaining them, they don't get to make money off maintaining them, right? But if they get to build a new one, then they make more money off of that. And so of course they were more than happy to build a bunch of infrastructure they can then rate base it all. So, and I think my understanding is that I think with the EV program, I think there is a role for utilities to play. As we as a state look at this issue, there is not one solution to anything. It's not like rooftops not going to solve everybody's problems. Utilities not going to solve everybody's problems. It's all of the different pieces working together and finding the most efficient and effective way. Rooftops, CSGs, DSG, DG, utility scale stuff, even with the EV charging stuff. I mean, to some extent, you're going to need the utility to be involved in that, because again, information, that hosting capacity analysis is not good just for connecting generation, but also for figuring out where you can put, some chargers, right? Or so, because that's going to pull a bunch of load out. And so where can you do that? There's definitely a role for everybody to play in, some element of a competitive market. I mean, we, as a society, we all agree that, competition is good, right? It's good for society as a whole. Monopolies inherently are bad because there's no incentive to innovate, right? And I mean, I can only choose Comcast. Comcast, I don't have great service, right? And because there's no competition. And so, but there's definitely a role for them to play, an important role for them to play. It's just trying to figure out what that is. And at least in my experience, a good partner willing to work with folks. It's more like you're bringing them along, kicking and screaming. But eventually, I mean, everyone's going to have to come along, because we got one planet, and we have to find a way to kind of solve some of the issues that we have. And there's all these great innovative technologies that allow us to solve some of those problems, and we got to start utilizing them. I'll tell you just a quick tidbit. Demand response is one of those issues. There's a hearing coming up this next Thursday at the PUC about using demand response. And for those of you who don't know, demand response is the ability to use less electricity. And so instead of generating more, if you use less, that's great. We have demand response. I signed up for, where they don't use my air conditioning when there's, you're hitting peak. And all utilities have to have some level of demand response to kind of avoid hitting those peaks. But you could use it for a lot more. It's great for resiliency, right? If you look at like how much generation is going on versus what load there is, you can use demand response to smooth those things out to keep them in line. Because how the system works, I'm sure everybody knows this, but like you want generation and load to equal out, right? You can't have too much of one or the other. And so you could use demand response for that. You could use it to like not buy electricity when it's really expensive, or to buy less of it. And the utilities in this state are just not doing that. Like they just they're required to use it. They use it as little as possible. I've heard they, do better than other utilities, but not at the same level if you had a competitive marketplace and were able to kind of like let people kind of use the competitive marketplace to lower that demand, make the system more resilient, and save money for ratepayers. Again, Xcel doesn't make any money saving money for ratepayers. They only make money if they build stuff. And so again, there's not a great incentive for them. So if you want them to use more of that, we probably got to figure out to incentivize them to do it. Maybe give them a cut of it or something. But you clearly, people are rational actors. So they will act in a way that furthers those interests. If saving money for the ratepayers doesn't make them money, then that's not where they're going to spend their efforts. That's common sense. If you expect anything different, you're silly.
That's why when you mentioned Connexus, I really admire them.
Oh, they're doing a great job.
Yeah, stepping back and pulling away from GRE, and so they can put more renewables out there. That's awesome.
Nexus is a perfect example of utility that's embracing the future, looking at technology, and trying to figure out. And again, that's because the co-op model, right? They want to do what's best for their members, and so we've worked closely with them. We've been part of their integrated resource plan as they move forward. And they want to have a system that's safe and reliable and very, very cost effective. And embracing all the new technologies. Connexus is a role model in this state and probably in this country. So I think there's someone. Hopefully, more people will follow, and really, really happy that they're a member of ours and we're working with them.
Yeah.
I have a question about that though. When they were a speaker, for us, they also said that meeting that deadline for 2040 was going to be tough, and thought nuclear was an important part of the deal.
Yeah, I think everyone looks at their resources, and part of the problem is just building stuff. So even if they, even utilities that want to build more stuff, depends on what you're doing and kind of the take up rate for stuff. I know they're always evaluating data, but one of the problems that we have in this country as a whole is we don't have enough transmission. Like there is a huge backlog. When I talk about the backlog for connecting like rooftop and CSGs, the distributed generation backlog, there is a huge backlog. I've heard there's like literally more capacity online to be built in this country than currently even exists in it. And transmission is a really, really big problem. And so, God, even if you wanted to go out and build a large utility size solar project, you might not be able to do it, or it might be years from now. So I'm sure they're going to find a solution. Nuclear is, and when they talk about clean energy, and I think everyone should be aware of this, that 100% clean energy bill, it's not renewable energy, it's clean energy. Very much part of that deal was Xcel maintaining their nuclear reactors. So my understanding is Xcel really shouldn't have a hard time meeting the standard, because between their nukes and what else, the other stuff they have, like they have a pretty good head start, and it's going to be pretty much a cakewalk for them to meet the standard. I think obviously other utilities, co-ops, who are less sophisticated, some of them are smaller and don't have the resources that an Xcel has, or Dakota, or Connexus. Connexus is the third largest utility, in this state, have more resources and kind of look into those things and move forward. So, nuclear, I definitely expect it to be part of the future, but I think we're going to keep moving forward. The cost of nuclear is expensive, it just is, and even probably maintaining the old reactors. And so at some point, even that will be cost prohibitive as you see, long-term storage battery projects come online. One thing I didn't talk about is Form Energies has with Xcel promoted this, and they got a grant for it and stuff. And so they're doing a 10 megawatts battery storage project at Sherco. So, part of where they're building a big facility, and that's with long-term energy. So it's iron air batteries. So like these are batteries that like, they don't look like Tesla power walls. They look like semi trucks, like the containers there. And they're meant to kind of, maintain energy, not for 4 or 12 hours, but for like days.
Hundreds.
And so it's a great new technology. It's great for Minnesota, because obviously we got lots of iron up north.
Well, Curtis, thank you so much. We're coming up against our time. We've got our board meeting coming up in a few minutes. And so thank you so much for all of this. This is great information for all of us to understand, and really appreciate all the work that MnSEIA is doing and you're doing to help move the ball forward.
Well, thank you very much, Doug. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for the great questions. Those are really good ones. Doug, I'm going to follow you. I'll follow up with you on the Solar for Schools thing, because that's not something I know much about. But yeah, thank you very much for being here, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
All
Well,
right.
thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.